Sure, so I think we should start even though two important people are not here. As always, we have a lot to talk about, and we're going to end at 8 tonight. I think the last two meetings we've gone a little late, and I think we should just aim for 8. One thing that's really important that we keep pushing off, and last time, even though we had a piece of paper, we pushed it off, is the schedule for the next couple of months and perhaps for the next year or two, but we're only looking through the end of June right now. And you all had that last week, okay? I don't know if the public got a copy of that last time, but I did print out a couple copies. This has a State Board of Education date for on 5/17 that we would aim for. I think we're probably, if we do the accelerated merger, we would aim for an earlier date. But so know that this is just a draft. This is not at all final.
And we have one.
So I'll pass these around. Again, it's a draft, and it doesn't say draft. It's not enough for everyone. And I want to thank Amy for doing that. Amy is our clerk, and she's also put together a huge amount of information for us, as has Jill, who's not a clerk, but obviously very much involved. So I want to thank you, plus all the folks at the central office who've really put in a huge amount of time on documents. So I'm going to review what we're trying to do today. We have a full slate on the agenda. We're not going to be able to get everything done. But again, one thing we must do is the schedule. We're going to approve the minutes first, and then I'm going to talk about public comments. We do have the recognition of groups and individuals at that point. I'm not sure whether we actually want to recognize you at that point because we won't have had any conversation. I'm wondering if perhaps we want to push it off a little bit and talk about the study committee report a little bit before we hear from you, but we can play it out a little bit. Then there are several things in the actual study committee report we want to discuss. That's the accelerated merger report. We're going to talk for a few minutes or maybe longer about the other options that a small group of us started to talk about, and then keep working if we decide to do so on the accelerated merger, which is, again, the looming date. So let's go ahead and, is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Is there a second? Second. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? No extensions, it stands. Thank you, Amy. Do take a look at on your minutes, make sure that you look at the dates for future meetings. And folks, these are, if you don't have them for the public, these are on the website. I should have said, and I will now, that as most of you've all been to these meetings before, I see. All of you. Steve Head is a Putney resident who was going in and out, so he hasn't been to one of these meetings. So I think I'll wait till he comes back to talk about how it works with public comments, okay? So let's go ahead. So does it work to not have public comments now? Is that okay with you guys, or do you want us to say something right now?
We can talk later, you said.
Yeah. Does that work with everyone? Well, okay. So we usually pass around a piece of paper. Amy, did you do that already? Okay, so do pass that around.
It's been around.
It has been around? Okay. Christina, would you do me a favor, and if you see more people?
I will.
Yeah. Okay. So, update from working group on phase 2 red variations. So a few of us met, and it was a it wasn't a quorum, but it was about 5 of us. So a quorum would have been if there were 5 voting members, but there was only, I think only 3 of us were voting members. Right, so it was myself, Kim, Christina, Ricky, Alice, and Matt, and Mulbro sat in on that. And I think we should all sort of chime into this conversation. I did take some notes, so maybe I'll quickly review those. We did talk a lot about Marlboro, and I think that was interesting for us. Just learning about their voyage, which is almost more treacherous than ours, not treacherous, I won't say, but complicated than ours. Although they also have a sort of a wide open field for their options, so that was interesting. But they're a very small school. They have choice, they're K through 8, right? And they have choice, I think, from 6 to
9 to 12.
9 to 12, okay. So we talked about various options, and really didn't talk in depth about what those options meant. We talked about Putney, Marlboro, Dummerston, which I said that I didn't think that would work for Putney. Halifax, Reedsboro, oh, this is just an example, so I won't. Marlboro was talking about joining up with Halifax, Reedsboro, Wardsboro, Rockingham, but that's obviously not our concern. Another option was, and these aren't really, so when I say option, I don't mean a logical option. I mean an example of what Act 46, something that could happen in Act 46. BUHS bans, which is the same as BUHS, right? You can see it as one unit. Brattleboro, Guilford. BUHS bans Brattleboro, Vernon, and so on and so forth, right? You put one small school in that scenario. Brat staying as one district, that would be Brat Town, one district. Brat and BUHS is another option. Vernon, one district. Dummerston, one district. Vernon and Guilford side by side. Dummerston and Putney side by side. You know, those are the options. What we didn't talk about in that setting, and we were running out of time, is something that then floated to me and had been suggested by various people. And that is a unified elementary school district, which would be all the small schools. And so I emailed folks and said, is this an option worth exploring? And everyone said yes.
That's everybody but Brattleboro.
Right, and so there seems to be sort of two issues that seem to keep bringing up, two issues. So the Vernon choice and Brattleboro the town of Brattleboro being significantly larger than the other towns. So in the current version of the super board, as we're referring to it, setting, we're looking at 5 Brat members and then 1 from each of the other towns, so that gives Brattleboro the majority. One could then play that out and say, well, actually, in the board setting, we're all thinking, we're not defining ourselves by our towns, we're looking at students individually, but if one were to, look at it from the, who has more, quote unquote, vote power, Brattleboro would have that. So those are sort of two issues that keep recurring. So that would address that issue, because Brattleboro would be on its own, and then the smaller towns would have 1 or 2 votes per town. There would be more equality in the voting setting, one might presume. But there are serious consequences. All of these have very serious consequences. So, for example, that sort of setting, one could consider all of the elementary school, in the elementary union school district, all the schools could perhaps have choice, but if all those schools have choice, what would that mean? There are consequences for the high school, and what you'd have to really talk about the philosophy of public education. None of these discussions or options are easy. Nothing is simple. But those could be brought, we could start to discuss those at this point. If we were to do that, I would strongly suggest that we keep moving on the accelerated merger option, and discuss those in another setting, or not necessarily in another setting, but not lose our main goal or our main consideration, as we discussed in our second meeting, that we decided that we would focus very strongly on the accelerated merger to see if it is an option worthy of our voters' consideration. So I just spoke for about 8 minutes. How do you guys want to proceed? Do you want to talk about those options, perhaps not in much depth? Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do we, I'm just not clear on this, we have to decide that we want our voters to only vote on accelerated first, or we can't give them two options, right?
Well, I believe it's a little bit, I think we can't give them two options, but we could potentially give them the option of putting Vernon as a recommended district. At least that's what Chris Leopold said.
The term advisable versus necessary.
Say that again now?
It's the term advisable versus necessary.
What that mean?
I'm not quite sure.
Right, so we could get Chris Leopold in to talk to us about that if we wanted, but I believe that's if one thinks that Vernon is not going to vote for the accelerated merger.
I don't know.
It was clear as mud that we're not.
Yeah. I believe that it's if one senses that Vernon would not vote, then you give yourselves the out so that it would then, I believe it then, rather being an accelerated merger with all of the districts, it would become the next, it would automatically become, what's the word for all of them? Right, conventional. So we wouldn't have to go through another vote process, I believe.
Can we clarify what? Could you repeat? what
So
you just
again,
said?
I would not swear on this because these things are really complicated, but I believe that if this group were to agree that accelerated merger option should be presented to the voters, and we sensed that Vernon, the townspeople of Vernon, would vote against it, I believe we could put in the language, I think it would have to be two articles on the ballot. I don't know what the phrasing is, but you would be able to, okay, I'm being complicated. If on that ballot, after the vote, it was turned out that Vernon did not vote for that merger, the rest of the districts could then become one union without having to go ahead and go through the entire process again, not the entire process.
So that's called a modified unified district, so the MUD. Right. That's much like Chittenden,
Yeah.
And
East.
where would that leave Vernon?
Kind of out on the road.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
It's almost like what happened with Mount Mansfield Union District in Huntington stayed out. So that was under Act 153. It was a little bit different than what we're dealing with here, but this is what Chris Leopold said to me, that if it got to a point, and he said, you know, I think it was the same day that the Vernon Forum was supposed to happen Monday, he said it would be really important to have communication with the public in Vernon before you made any sort of assessment. But he said if there was a sense that they didn't want to choose the options at hand, then it would be what he said, you'd form a modified union district, which would essentially, that's where he used the term advisable, that Vernon would be advisable but not necessary. So then you create this unified district and Vernon is out. You don't get the first year incentives, so you go to the conventional incentives.
Right.
And is that true for any other town, or just, is there something particular about?
No, it
Vernon,
would be
or
any
anybody?
time, yes.
Can you hold on a second?
But it's really.
Right, I know, but I want to ask committee members before I go to the public, okay? And, yeah.
Yeah, we touched on this last time, and I was just wondering, in that scenario that you gave, Vernon being out on their own, what does that mean? So right now, we're very much integrated with central office, with consolidated special ed, like, are they completely out on their own?
No, he said
Or-
they, you know, you'd be a supervisor, I think he said it's supervisory union.
Huntington is in the supervisory union.
Right,
Right.
so they would still be in the supervisory union, there'd be that relationship, but,
So they essentially stay how they are right now,
Yes.
just without joining us.
And they would they then need to, in order to avoid the penalty later on, they would need to find
Right.
something else to do. They
Yeah.
couldn't just stay that.
Right.
Okay, they have to merge with somebody
Something.
at
No,
some.
they could do alternative stuff.
Right,
Yeah,
right. They
they
would
don't
have,
have to merge with somebody.
no, but you'd have to do something. They just couldn't just say we're done. They would have to do something.
So let's hear from Matt.
Or you have to plead your case to the State Board of Ed. I mean, that's how I see it.
Yeah.
And so they would still be covered under the SU in terms of curriculum and assessment and all that kind of stuff?
Mhm.
They just wouldn't be able to take advantage of like program expansions that we come
Shared
up with?
resources. That's right.
Okay,
And it's very likely that costs would increase
right.
for Vernon.
Now, I would think, I mean, I don't know, this would be more of your answer, but I would think it could lead to some contractual issues for staff too. It wouldn't be under the big umbrella in theory anymore if you're your own
Correct.
district.
That, Chris touched on that.
Would healthcare be involved? I mean, because then we're not under the,
Well, I mean,
The
it's all
SU.
negotiated, I guess, that would open that up. to
what are the negotiations open again for Vernon staff?
that. Well, for the whole district, next year.
Jill?
So I'm going back to the vote and trying to piece together what you all were saying. So if I'm understanding, we would put on the ballot something like, this is the accelerated merger, do you agree to go forward with everybody in the supervisory union? And then kind of step two, should one town decide not to, we agree to go forward? So that we would avoid having to go back to a revote?
Right.
Yeah, I believe that's how it works, but it would be far more definitive language than that.
Sure.
But we can look into that sooner rather than later if that's something you guys, hold on a minute.
I would think that would be important to do, just to maximize the use of this time here that
Yeah.
we're spending together, rather than have to redo.
So, Ron, could you look into that language with Chris, what the ballot would say?
So Alice, that goes to this timeline as well?
Yep. Well, so let's,
So in theory, they'd be two different things, right, Alice? So you got one with Act 46, accelerated preferred, and then the other would be a MUD actually under Act 153/156. Am I interpreting that right?
I think so. But Act
Yeah, I'm not
46
sure.
also has the conventional path, which is what Ron just described, and I think what you just described pretty well.
yeah. When I was talking to Chris, I don't believe he used the word mud with me, so, but it sounds like he did with Ron. Okay, so, guys, can we move off, what else do we want to do?
Last time I asked you that.
Do we want to keep a small group working on the other options that, the other,
I just
yeah.
have a couple questions about the previous topic, which
Yes.
is, so what happens to the board structure then? Do we have to
Good point.
rethink board structure? Or do we have to rethink all our financials and savings? I mean, you're kind of, I feel like that's kind of like a bait and switch a little bit in terms
Yep.
of all the things we've talked about. So if we're talking about doing that, we kind of have to revisit our savings, all those models as a conventional if Vernon isn't in it, because why wouldn't we give that a 5-second look-see? We have a whole year to do it, you know.
I think that's a valid point.
And I have another thought too, which is, you know, we all know the real incentive on the accelerator is the 10 cents. And so when the 10 cents goes away and we're looking at 8642,
Mhm,
other options sort of become more attractive.
mhm.
And so, you know, nothing against all the conventional ideas, but it starts to be on parity with some of the other options out there when we look at the tax incentives. So then, is it right for us as representatives of a town not to really compare those two options fully and just say we're just going to send it to them without having done a really good assessment of all the other options at disposal to our town? That really, I question that.
Would
Oh,
you?
wait, guys, Ian hasn't spoken yet.
And kind of to your point, as we discussed last time, the big benefit of the conventional over the accelerated is that we have a lot more time to put together something, time to discuss with the public and really, take our time to build it right. And if we hold the vote all at once, we kind of reduce that. so there's no point in doing that.
No, I completely agree with Christina that, you know, we should just vote on the accelerated, and at that point, if one town votes no, we're back at the drawing board, and then we can look at all aspects. Yeah.
And just to follow up with Christina's comments, it's not only, I mean, we all know this, but I feel like it needs to be said, it's not primarily about the tax incentives, it's about
Yep.
the educational programming, and that should really be the primary
That's the
focus.
primary, yeah. Okay, so, so I'm hearing that we're all tend to be leaning towards clear language, but let's not vote on that now, let's vote on that in a couple of weeks. Does that sound good?
When you say that, what do you mean we're all clear?
Well, it sounds like we're leaning towards not creating this other scenario if the AM doesn't work, right?
So that
Okay.
means we're all going forward with the accelerated
Nope.
and trying to make it that.
We're not, we haven't talked about that yet.
No,
we're
they're
sort of
saying if we present something, and we present the accelerated, we're just presenting accelerated, we're not presenting any other options.
So did we decide whether we're still looking at accelerated now?
We're gonna have that conversation in a sec, but Inez, you had a question.
It was just actually an observation that I've never heard, and I've never heard of this, and it's probably never happened before, that a group of towns were presented with two options like that. And I don't even know if it would work under the statute to have these particular two options presented to towns. And I mean, without
So the
really,
person,
without.
the person,
Yeah.
go ahead. The person who suggested that language was Chris Leopold,
Yeah.
who has worked on many, many of these.
It would be helpful
So-
to see his, suggestions in writing, so we can see, what part of the statute would permit that. It's very hard to evaluate what Chris Leopold says when it is sort of communicated to us by word of mouth.
Right, so if we were to consider that, Chris Leopold would help us write language about that. So, go ahead.
Well, I may have missed it, you may have said it, but when you were talking about all the various options, I didn't hear you say that there was an option of staying the way we are and making our case to the AOE. And I know that there are districts that are doing that, and I think that we have a very good case to be doing that, and I would like that looked at also.
So thank you. We did not talk about that. I can put that on the list. Now let's spend a few minutes talking about whether we do want to look at the other options in any level of depth right now while we are working on the accelerated merger or completely change our focus. Hold on a second. I'm asking the committee.
My feeling on that is whether you support the accelerated or not, I don't feel right making the decision whether the town gets to have a say or not. That's the part that I'm struggling with, is you kind of separate my own feeling on whether we should do it or not. I think that I would want to put it to allow the town the opportunity to talk about it, whereas who are we to say, sorry town, you don't get a say? That's my feeling.
Yeah.
That's actually a really good point. I personally do not support the accelerated option at all, but that's a really good point as to why to put it to a vote.
I agree with you, Beth, about having people make an informed choice, but I feel like when you're making a choice in a vacuum, it's no choice at all, and I feel like for me representing people in Dummerston, I'd like to be able to say, well, this is one thing we've looked at really thoroughly, and these are some other things we've looked at, and here, there's no way between now and June we could possibly look at regs or any of these in the same in-depth fashion we've done this. However, this will inform looking at other options as well, and I don't even know if we can get financial models to, not that I think these are so great, frankly, but no pun intended, but I feel like presenting voters would say, what do you think of this? Well, as compared to what? And I think there's been so much misinformation about, I've read on some of your old websites informing the public we have to merge. Well, that actually isn't so. You don't have to merge. And people are under the impression it's accelerated or nothing. And it's February, so how are we gonna do that kind of, putting it to a vote? It's very hard to understand this. I think we've all spent so much time doing this. I mean, we're the stewards of this for the people in our town, so I think we have to give them some information to compare and say these are like the bullet points of the pros and cons of both. For me anyway.
And
I know you can put.
that was one thing that I was gonna bring up as maybe another working group, that we might want to focus on sort of a public education component. Come up with a very structured, informational, educational type of series of presentations to provide the voters.
So everyone's getting the same information.
Right, yeah,
versus
and it's
the
factual, it's
interpretation.
real, it's relevant to our districts, our communities, and that way, we level the playing field so that maybe people can be a little comfortable and, a little more comfortable, because change is very difficult, and not, to be able to look intelligently at the choices. So, I do think, while we look at the accelerated, I agree with Christina, I don't know if it's possible to look at all the other options, but it seems like a sort of an easy one to tag into the accelerated is the conventional.
Yep.
Because it's basically just plucking a piece out.
Right.
So that would be an easy one to.
I don't think it would address some of the concerns that a lot of people in Dummerston have brought to me, though, about the uneven weighting. And in fact, if we look at conventional, say, without one town, which will be unnamed, it makes it even more unweighted. So I feel like that doesn't sort of give people an option that might feel different, do you see what I'm saying?
I was thinking more the educational programming part of it, how it would affect the kids, and I wasn't thinking so much about governance, because I figured that would come as a natural consequence.
Richard? Okay. Okay. There are a couple people who haven't spoken. Mark, you haven't said anything.
No, I had a thought. It seems that we do have one sticking point that's perhaps that one town may not buy into the accelerated readily. Is there any way to get a straw vote from that particular town prior to us launching off into any of the other options?
You mean a town meeting, for example?
A town meeting or some type of gathering whereby that we can get something a little more solid than maybe they will not go with the accelerated. If they came through with a 70% for an accelerated, then we could just limit our planning to one thing rather than presenting this plethora of different options and that have 17 indexes attached to each one that nobody understands.
So I think the board has a lot more to say, but I'm going to ask you to speak since you're the chair, Vernon, I believe.
I'm not.
You're not. You're on the board, though.
I am not. I am on the board.
Do you want to?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I would like to address a couple of things.
Yeah.
One, we had intended to bring facts to our town, and we canceled it because of the snowstorm. That meeting is rescheduled for the 22nd, so we will have a town forum where our town will be informed. So then we could come back and we could answer your question because we will have quite a few people there, I'm sure. The other thing is we're talking, or you have been talking about, Vernon, if we do not go along with this, that we would be out. So my question would be, we're out with the accelerated, but we don't have to do this now. We don't have to do the accelerated. So if in a year from now, Vernon decides, okay, we need to do something, can we then join?
Yes.
Okay, well, that's an option that I think every town should know. Every town.
Yeah. And I think, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I can tell you that we can certainly come back. We can have Matt come back. Well, maybe not Matt. On the after the 22nd.
Well, I think Matt stays on.
Until March?
No, he stays on this committee because he was appointed by the committee.
He won't, not if he, I don't think so. He doesn't.
Right back in.
Maybe.
That is my understanding.
In for life.
Hold on, Inez. Yeah.
Just one thing, I just wanted to address one point. It was only said that Vernon would be out of things if they opt out of the accelerated option and everyone else opts to then immediately go into a merger under the conventional, which from our discussion here is not what we're aiming at, having that vote immediately. So the Vernon is out of the picture thing is not anything that's on the table at this point in time.
No, but it was said that you wanted to have a vote prior to May 17th. Am I correct? Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, but that's for the school, the state school board. If we were, and we actually are thinking really it needs to be before then, that would be taking the report that this committee would, if this committee were to finish writing the report, and then we would take it to school boards and come back and discuss it, and then either agree, vote to send it on or not.
Right.
So that's what that date is.
Right, right. So you would need to know from Vernon whether we would or we would not.
But before, anytime May 17th before, you would be taking some kind of vote in order to send that up there.
Correct.
So we're looking at a very accelerated point at this point. This is February, March, April, May,
Right, so the
less than
vote-
3 months.
The vote at the town level would happen, I believe, in June.
You have end of May, beginning of June.
Yeah, we'd have to. Yeah.
So I'm just thinking back to Christina's point about two things, about the idea of giving communities chances to look at multiple options versus the time crunch that, how much time do we have to put into another model to be ready to give folks the kind of choice, the kind of discussion that you asked for? And what I always get stymied by is the way in which the state has set us on a very particular, very narrow path, that as much as I would love to do that, I don't think this process allows us to do that.
Yeah.
And that's what I keep getting stuck by. I mean, I would love to be able to have the opportunity and the time for that, but given how long it's taken us to get to where we are, we're not there yet, even on the accelerated piece, to say we're going to do accelerated, and here's one other option that we've done with equal vigor and equal examination.
No, that's what I'm saying, there's
Yeah,
no way,
yeah.
I mean, we kind of,
It-
that, in some ways, that is a fait accompli, but,
It is.
but, on the other hand, to not have done anything and say, look, but, we're not out of a deal. Act 46 gives you many paths to heaven, or otherwise, as ever you view it. So there's many paths to paradise, and so this is one that we've looked at, but I just feel like when you stick something on a ballot, as a school board, we're saying we think as stewards of, we can't really, we expect every voting person to understand this, so I think as stewards of the ballot, we have to at least do some diligence to say there are other options and here's what other things we're considering. That's, but I don't think it can be at the level that we've done here.
Right,
I know
and-
that,
and-
I know that.
No, and then the hard part with that is even in suggesting these, there are these 4 other plans that we could, but when you think about them as paths, we haven't traced the paths. We don't really know if those are paths, even in the suggestion. So that's one part of it. The other part, in our conversation with Putney we had up here last week, one of the pieces that came up in our conversation was about being very clear that we are responding to a very particular law that was passed not by us, but for us or to us. And that in any decision that we make, we know that that law is what we're responding to. And it may change, but we have no control over that. And so I think the context, and to me the context to give to voters is that context. That there are certainly any number of paths, and the legislature may choose a whole other option later on that we aren't even exploring. But for right now, what we have, this is what's in front of us. And to the best of our ability, we've traced that path, knowing that there are other possibilities. But to suggest that there are other possibilities that we've explored that could be to paradise, we really aren't going to know that. And that's the other part.
I see you, Judy.
I can see you look at Act 46.
I know there are 3 people. Yeah.
So, I want to come back to what Amy said about the community forums. With Brattleboro, we've held information and spoken at our board meetings, but we've not held a community forum because I was hoping we would have something concrete to look at before we take it to people to talk. So that's why when you said that we should have a specific, I'm very much in agreement with that, that we're all talking about the exact same thing, that we know pretty much, that we feel solidly about whatever it is that we're looking at with the accelerated merger when we're presenting it to each of the towns. Brattleboro will not have a community forum until our March 16th meeting. So yes, because you all have taken up all the time. There's no time. There's just really no time because we're a town meeting later with you guys. So we'll have heard from that. That was one. I wrote notes here. And Christina, I agree completely that we need to look at the other ones. And Richard, yeah, you're right. There's a million other options. But I think that the small group was kind of coming out with some very clear things, and I almost wonder if we can come at which ones to look at with some of the very forthright discussions we're getting around to now. I passed Alice a TED Talk on super chickens, and it talks about how you get your best thoughts when you're at a point in a group that everyone is, it talks about a lot of things, but that's the part that I tend to do the most, that you can all be very honest. And I think we've kind of gotten there with all of us now. And we're getting the stuff on the table, and I think that's where we have to be. So and then a little bit different on that, I think, Christina, that we have looked harder at some of these options than what we perhaps think. We haven't put them all together, but we have talked about what the differences are and what we would hope to achieve, and we've talked a little bit about some of the cost. So it's not like we're starting over with something completely new. So if we say that, okay, we're not going to take and merge all of us, but we're going to take the one merger that you said that's all the elementary schools and then leave the high school off or something. That's a little complex because some of you have middle school, but we already have a lot of that data and it's not really starting at zero. So it may be possible if we drill a little bit more and figure out exactly what are the issues that we're concerned about, and then which one of these other options might be the best to address that. And then my final point is Vernon going to say no? We're all saying we think Vernon might say no. But is it only based on school choice? Is that their only issue?
I think
You need to go to
Do
the
you
farm.
I don't know that Vernon will say. I don't know what Vernon will do.
Right.
It's hypothetical. I mean, it's really hard to know. I'm sure, like the members of the audience, there's as many people that have different concerns about different aspects of it in each of the towns. I mean, maybe some towns will have a lot more. I mean, obviously tuition is going to be a big concern, but I would imagine there are other concerns. And I know for a fact there are some people that think it's a good idea too. So, I mean, I don't.
Well, it comes back to my same issue that I was making at the beginning, that perhaps if we're all very clear now on what the biggest problems are, we can start to look at, what are the biggest concerns we're hearing from our communities, and are they addressable? Is it, maybe that's how we kind of go forward in looking at accelerated and the reds, and if they're not addressable at all, ever under the accelerated, then I don't know how much time you've spent. I do want to take it to the voters. I feel like that's important.
you want to take the accelerated to the voters.
I want us to make the best sausage we can and let them try it. And I'm not sure if it's accelerated or if it's something else, but I think that's our job here. And because of the timeline, we started with accelerated, so I still want us to continue on that. But maybe we're at a point, instead of trying to figure out how to make the accelerated work, we start from the other side of what are the problems and the issues, and then how do they fall into the
Gina?
Yeah, I'll speak for myself, but I also think that there's quite a few Vernon board members that feel like this. And we're not necessarily going to not go along with it. Our feeling, or my feeling, is we wanted to look at other options before we decided on, yeah, let's jump in full force to the accelerated. We wanted other options, not necessarily every option that's out there. Maybe, like you guys said, there's like a lot of them. But pick maybe 3 and, look at them.
I think it's related to what Jill said. In order for it to go to the town, we have to have those public meetings, those public forums, to lay out the options. I mean, with the accelerator, we can show the programmatic expansions that we're hoping for. That could happen in the conventional as well. But we also want to show the financial issues.
Right.
You know, first year incentives, this is what this is, and here's the other conventional, let's say, without the first year. I mean, I think it's important that each town has a chance to look at those options, to have an informed point of view on this.
I totally agree.
Okay, so I hope, Mark, and then I want to talk about public comment.
Just a real quick question, you sort of tickled my thoughts about it. If everybody jumps into the accelerated program, can they jump out? After the first year?
No, if you're in, you're in.
We're not ever?
No,
Never.
right.
Just like Matt, he's on for forever.
So, Hotel California.
You can check in, but you can't check out.
Never leave.
So, guys, I think we do have a ton to do tonight, as I said, but also that depends on how the rest of this conversation goes a little bit. I do want to, if it's all right with everyone, can we table the board discussing this? Because clearly the public has, this might be the appropriate time, okay? Is that all right with everyone? So, I'm gonna go, Charlie, why don't we do you and then Inez and so on.
I don't care about the order.
So just say who you are in the town.
Charles Fish, Chuck Fish, Charlie Fish, call it as you want, from Dummerston. Two things. One is, if someone came from outer space, a rational person from outer space, and looked at this law, and someone said this, the legislature of the state of Vermont has come up with 4 or 5, whatever it is, options for the public to choose, right? It's in the law, there are these options. You'd think then that it would follow logically that the voters in all the towns would be able to consider all of the options before deciding which one they wanted to go with. Now, this isn't your fault, because the legislature, because the legislature also put in the bribes of the tax advantages, and they also gave you an impossibly short deadline for considering all options. So you're under great pressure, and I have sympathy with you. But if you look at it from a logical point of view, why give towns, districts, all of these options if you don't also give them the opportunity to consider them in a decent, thorough way? And I know you're aware of this, but it seems to me both obvious and almost impossible given what you're faced with. The second point or question is this. As you know, my greatest concern is for town meeting, and not just town meeting, but what town meeting represents, the political identity of the various towns. And I haven't gone to all of your meetings, but has that ever been discussed, or do you plan to discuss it? I hear educational advantages, and I hear financial considerations, and I hear the question of how to give all towns an opportunity to consider the options. But am I the only person who is concerned about the political consequences of this? No. But I don't hear it. And again, you had a lot on your plate, so maybe it's not your fault, but I don't hear it in the public discussion.
We've talked about the leadership councils and how the school board part would change. We've talked about how it would come to town meting. Is there something
True,
more?
but that isn't the same thing.
That is, I
arrangement.
think that's a great concern for a lot of us here that are I won't call myself an old timer yet, but are so used to the tradition of town meeting and what it means as a community.
Yes.
And I view that as very important. I may only see my neighbor that one time during the year, but that is super important to be able to discuss our community issues, school, town, in that aspect. And that's one of my hardest things with this is giving up that sense of community.
Right.
We've already given up
5% of the budget in our town.
Right, exactly. So I can sympathize and totally agree with you on that aspect. So I'm struggling hard on that one.
And it may not have, yeah.
I've had my
Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. And it didn't come up exactly the way you framed it, but I think that was the undercurrent of the whole discussion in Putney last week. And we spent a lot of time talking about these leadership councils as a response. Not that it was a necessarily an adequate response to the concerns, but that was the only answer we had. But was certainly an issue for our group too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't understand exactly what it is that would be lost. Since I'm not at your town
See,
meeting.
and Bracktown does it totally different than the outlying communities. The outlying communities is you get together, you have your articles, you discuss them. Sometimes there's nothing to it and they just fly right through. But it's a sense of getting everyone together. And Guilford, Jefferson, Putney, you have Vernon, you have a huge turnout of people that come, not only for just voting on the issues at hand, but it's a sense of community, which you do start talking about each, all these different things that are happening.
And you would lose that?
You would.
Because?
You'd go in, you wouldn't have the discussion regarding the school. It would already been decided and sent on.
What would have already been decided?
The budget. Yeah, you wouldn't be talking about any of the articles, basically. If anyone had any concerns and they hadn't attended a lot of meetings, because people don't attend meetings.
But the budget's still gonna be voted on by each town at the town meeting.
Changes.
Huh?
I think we're getting off topic.
Yeah.
Why don't we, well, I think it goes to the key of what you guys are saying is going on in Putney. I'm trying to get it, like, what is the concern about, from people, so I'm still trying to.
You can't
I do
change,
think-
you can't make changes to it, because it's already, it's basically already done for you. So the discussion would not really be about whether you're gonna approve it or not. Our discussion would have to change around these leadership councils as to the other issues that this council is addressing. So it wouldn't be the same type of discussion. I think we would still have discussions, but it won't be as if we're really running things, like in
So
terms of the budget.
to understand, in Brattleboro, when all we do is present a budget and people can stand up and say we don't like it or whatever, but all the Brattleboro people can say is we're gonna chop off and this is the amount to approve. They don't actually tell us what they're going to remove. That comes back to.
Well, so it sounds like there's much more depth of conversation in the smaller towns, and I don't really think we can spend too much time on this. If this is an issue of concern, we definitely should, because it's essential to what we're talking about. Losing the discussion of the school budget at town meetings in small towns is at the heart of many of our communities. That's a core part of how we all commune once a year. So again, we can go back to that, but let's move on. Go ahead.
My comment is just in response to Jill's, is that I would just say, look at the percentage of people who have just attended your Brattleboro High School meeting. And I envision.
Not yours. But I will say that the fact that you said yours indicative of a feeling that other people who don't live in Brattleboro feel about the town meeting. I think I respect that, and I think we all know something about the weather. Chill watch. Sorry about that. But I think it's pertinent to know.
And then when you talk about leadership council, or the councils, it's sort of like a committee from the town representing another committee. It's not people involvement at the direct level. And that's the great part about living in a small community. We don't have representative town meeting, we have town meeting. So.
Thank you.
I agree with everything that has been said before me, and in particular, the oddity of having to vote on one option before considering everything else seems, like folly. I would urge the committee to start looking more seriously at these other options. I don't know, can we find out if we can apply for grants to look at these other options? Are there other grants? And that's a question that I put to Alice and Ron. Furthermore, I want to point out that this study committee and then the school boards, are deciding on what to do next. And any kind of merger, whether it's accelerated or a MUD or a RED or a conventional merger, amounts to a contract, between all of these school boards. And the town vote is ratifying what the boards do. The town vote is not the ultimate decision maker. The boards are the filter. The boards are the ones who are charged with the responsibility of choosing and deciding what is best for their school, And my concern with these incentives has always been that they're there to grease a town vote. The town vote is not the make or break thing. here, it's really the school board's decision that merger benefits the school and benefits a town. And then voters ratify that. This is a contractual principle, it's a merger principle, and you all should be aware of that.
Jody?
Well, I have a couple of things. Paul took one of the things away from me, and I wanted to start with that. I'll start with what, sorry, I'm not sitting there. I wanted to go to Richard's comment. And Richard's comment is very, very common throughout the study committee, is that we have to go down this path that the state set. This path that the state set is more than the accelerated merger. It's all the different things we could do. So I get very upset when I hear this path that we have to go through. The other thing I wanted to talk about was the high school board and at the meeting the other night. And I didn't go. I haven't gone for years because it's been absolutely useless. You can't understand the budget. You can't understand anything. That thing was only an hour long, and people were just sitting there. They had no idea what was going on. The high school budget is almost $28 million. If we merge today with the budgets that are being proposed, it would be $58,653,013. And that's twice the high school budget. Who the devil is ever going to figure out that budget? Who's going to vote on it? I don't know. 0.8% of the people went to that. The other thing I wanted to talk about was in the paper today. I guess it's in the Commons that came out. And the Finance Committee of Brattleboro made some very interesting comments about the high school budget. Their comments were, in general, the committee found it difficult to oversee the budget process. This critical role in regulating coverage of District 6 board meetings by Brattleboro Community Television played in aiding transparency. Long waits for information from supervisory union staff. One of the committee's questions went unanswered for 2 months. You can't get to the staff. Information is hard to find and not maintained in a central place online. For example, budget drafts were not published online. Meeting minutes are not published on the website in a timely manner that they wrote. So they're calling for a more transparent budget development process for just this $28 million high school budget. Can you imagine that we can't find anything out if it's $58 million? That's one of the things that really frustrates me, is that we wouldn't have our own budgets. We understand. Our head of our board always explains our budget very well. We can ask questions, we can make changes. None of that would be available through this big, huge mega board.
Well, I do want to go on to that, but I will say we don't actually know what would be available on this larger board, Jody, because it's never been.
Well, it's new. What you've been explaining, and this is what we're taking back, is what you're telling us.
Right, well, we haven't even really talked about a lot of things, what the financials of this board would be looking at.
And that's a problem, that's a big problem.
Right, so that's what, lots to talk about.
I'm listening, and I've heard everyone, and the biggest thing I've heard so far is that we have a lot of questions. You all have a lot of questions, and I think that's my biggest comment, is if Vernon does not vote for the accelerated course, it's because we don't have all the answers. And I don't want to go into anything without knowing it. If we don't go the accelerated, we've given ourselves another year to find out all these questions. And as my husband is a legislator, I can tell you now there are so many changes that is going to come about in this bill. I don't want to be part of it at this point, not knowing what those changes are. I can also tell you last weekend, he always brings homework, and he read me part of the bill, and I was appalled at the parts that he was reading to me within the legislature itself, that the legislators have no idea really how to answer the questions because they don't even know what they passed. They passed it so quickly. And that's something you all need to realize that. All I'm asking personally, and this is personally, this is not from the Vernon School Board, I think we should all take the time, and I don't mean till May 16th or 17th or whatever, or June, to actually learn about everything and then present it to our towns. We are going to present in February, but I personally will not vote to join a group when we don't know what the outcome will be. And I can see everyone here that can't even tell me what the outcome would be.
Right, and no one would say that they know the outcome, because I think everyone here knows that this is a very weighty bill that was rushed.
Yes, it was.
Rushed through the legislature, rushed across the board. I think we all would acknowledge that. And we would all say that it is not written well, some sections perhaps, but no one around this table would say that.
And that's what I'm trying to say, though. It looks like to me you're trying to accelerate the group yourself to do exactly what the legislature
Right.
did.
So I don't want to sort of banter back and forth, but we have a huge amount that we're looking at. We are, a core part of our job as school board members is to be fiscally responsible. We're all very aware that the property taxes in our towns are huge and unbearable for many of our citizens. So when we're given the option of giving folks the option of choosing some tax relief, that's a consideration. I think all of us would say that is why we are here today talking about the accelerated merger.
It could be relief from a higher tax.
Yes, so we're not, what I said a moment ago, I'm not going to banter back because this is the sort of discussion that could go on. I do want to speak for the board, saying that there is so much we do not know, and we are doing our best, and we have not yet voted on whether we are going to send the report, if we were to finish the report, to the school board, the state board. At some point we will have that, we will consider that, but we are not there right now. So I think everyone has spoken. You're good?
No, I'd just like to say that I appreciate all the hours and time that you as a committee have put into this, because I know it's a lot, and there's a lot of information out there, and I do appreciate each and every one of you.
Thank you.
Just one comment. Jill's point in response to what you were saying about the town meetings, I think was absolutely critical, because I also, as a Brattleboro person, honestly had no idea what you were talking about. And that right there is the problem with this whole super board concept. Because
Right, and that's actually, again, reflective of the concerns people have in the smaller towns, going hand in hand into this process with Brattleboro, who has a different idea of what community is. Not that it's bad at all, it's just different. So my suggestion, just to end public comment, is that Jill and Ian, I recommend that on town meeting, that you come to Putney or Dummerston or, any of these small, Vernon isn't on Tuesday, right? So anyway, I would highly recommend Brattleboro folks come to one of those meetings, because they're very, great lunches. So guys, we were still, and I really do want to give us the option of talking about the report for the accelerated merger, if we choose to do so. We were talking about how we want to consider the other options in the process. And also, before we talk about the report, I would want to talk about the schedule. So are there any suggestions of how Amy, do you have a suggestion for how we move forward?
When you look at the timeline, that seems like an easy thing to pick off.
Should we do that? Okay. Does that make sense, guys? Does everyone have on the board? Yeah.
Just if you're discussing options, probably the quickest one to discuss is doing nothing.
Yep.
What are the penalties as opposed to the benefits?
Okay, so I don't think can we not talk about that now?
Sure,
but
absolutely.
I've got that on the list. All right, well, let's get back to the list after we talk about the calendar works. So this, and everyone has one, right, on the board? So we probably really want to be looking for that May 17th meeting, Ron, correct?
Well, it sounds like the state board is probably going to have a meeting earlier in May.
Oh, I was thinking actually of April 19th.
Oh.
April 19th for what?
Well, that's a state board. Yeah, no way. Almost first. Okay. Can you find out for us? let's say it's 2 weeks before that.
So that would put it to the May 2nd.
What is the it?
In April or May?
Sending
So-
the report to the
So
state before that.
if we were to do the accelerated merger report, it would have to, we would go up there and talk to them about it. They would need it a few weeks before that.
So the it is their meeting.
Yes,
Okay.
the it. Which would precede, so we would have 2 cycles of forums perhaps, and we don't have forums at the start of this, and I don't know whether that was, whether we talked about that or not. But after the school board, state board, we would have forums and then the vote.
Yeah, I didn't put the forums on before, because I wasn't sure how we would do that.
Right.
Felt that was more of an independent.
For towns individual, okay.
Yeah, to just get a feel for what their communities
Right.
had questions on. And then where I put the forums was for actually starting a couple weeks before the state board event meeting and several weeks after is to go through. And that's where I thought, really solid presentation of information, to all communities would be needed.
Right.
Versus just coming and showing up and saying, hey, we're gonna talk about it, but, to have the real information up on the big screen with handouts to support, so that people
Right,
had that.
and why we would think that this was a worthy option of consideration.
Yeah, and then also sharing some of the logic that we, how we got to this point,
Yeah.
and, also addressing or recognizing the frustration that, we've been forced down well, not forced, but, we have to go down this one path and, determine whether or not it's a viable. If it's not, then we can look at another path, so, limiting the scope of this adventure.
What a kind word. Better than the one I would have chosen.
So, okay. So town forums on their, individual towns do their own forums before
Yep.
then.
Yep.
And that would have to be during this first top line from now until the end of March. We would have to do them
Right.
in parallel.
And then we have from the end of March to the end of April, we would have, it gives us a month to have each of the boards, go through the entire meeting cycle and weigh in on specific aspects.
Yep.
And at the same time, with another week extension, ideally, that we work through incorporating the input from the local boards into what would be the final, a final, report possibly. And then we would, the committee would vote whether or not to submit,
It'd have to be by mid-April.
Yeah, so it looks like the whole thing has to be shifted. I didn't,
Yeah, by like 3 weeks.
yeah, so.
So Chris Leopold mentioned to me something about a required timeframe that isn't showing up here, so I have to get back to him and ask him exactly what he needs.
Required timeframe for him or for us or the
For
public?
the
comment?
state board, a period for them to have it and then a turnaround time, so he wasn't really clear, but I'll ask him specifically.
I wonder if that's the Donna timing.
Yeah, my assumption was that we would be, if we, between the study committee vote to submit a report, that various drafts would go to the state board, or Donna Russa-Savage,
Right.
during those 4 weeks, to tweak, and then, then hopefully they would be able to render the decision in a very timely fashion so that we could, have enough time to.
So after we write, and then they approve, and they could come back and say, no, we don't like this one thing, and we'd have to change it. So do we have a chance to present it to the towns before the vote? Do we have enough time in there for that?
Which vote?
Town vote?
The final town vote, because we're gonna have public forums
Yes.
to try to incorporate theirs, but.
Yep, we have 5 weeks. 5 to 6 weeks. Depends on when we actually will schedule a town vote.
And anything that came back out of those town forums, we could still try to get the state board, or it's a done document?
I don't think you could change it after that,
Right.
because it would be before the state board meeting.
That's why I think what I said earlier about having forums in your towns now to get feedback. That's really helpful. And that's what we've been doing, modifying this draft along the way, bringing it back. So, you know, the Vernon meeting's on the 22nd. Guilford's gonna have some discussion March 16th, Brattleboro Town on March 16th and April 6th. The rest of you have had board meetings with good input. You'd like to schedule another one, I know.
Yeah, our next meeting, we'll talk about it.
It's just that, like, I went to the Guilford forum, I haven't been to their town meeting, Alice, but I went to a forum. And they were presented with information that we might not have in the final draft. So just, that's my concern, that people walked out thinking one thing and then have to make sure we get the, that's why I've held off in Brattleboro until we knew something enough, firm enough to say, this is really what it looks like.
Until we can get death by PowerPoint presentations for everyone where we all feel comfortable, we're all seeing the same thing. That, I mean, that's where I'm, I hate to say it that way, but I really fearful that each town is gonna put out there something that's a little bit different and we're gonna be in trouble.
And I didn't want to have people coming forward with, but we don't want this, we don't want this, but we don't even know if we're doing this. I think that's kind of.
But isn't it helpful to have that information as we come back and have conversations here? I mean, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
Our discussion is all about, this is where we are. We're not saying this is the end product, but
Right.
we really want to have your input so that we can make this as best, as good a document as we can. Not to say that it's the final version.
And I also think too, having forums now really mitigates some of the fear. You know, because there's a great deal of it out there, and it is a very complex situation that we're in, you know, and we have very limited, we're constrained, you know, in very specific ways that I don't think a lot of people beyond this room really understand. So I think the more that we can share that, and help people understand that this is how we've gotten to this point, you know, that we'll all be able to work, you know, towards hopefully some sort of solution.
Thank you.
Can I get some clarity on the time frame? That Ron mentioned something about a required time frame for the state board. What was, and somebody mentioned Donna's timing. I'm wondering what that means.
So when we send up the report, it gets looked at very carefully. And it comes back to us a couple of times. It could be something, you know, important, or, you know, it could be a typo. It could be very random. And so that the secretary and her support staff feel pretty good about it, and that it's ready to be presented to the board, but we also need to feel pretty good about it. There's no point in us all taking up a document that they're going to say, well, actually, no, that's not logical, because then we would, every time that happened, the whole process would have to start again. So that's the timing.
Is there a number on it?
Well, we're going to learn the specifics. We thought it was just about 2 weeks, but it might be an actual specific amount of time that we're not aware of. I don't know, that's what I'm saying. We're going to find out. Yeah.
Well, I guess I'm confused about the report, because you're going to send a report out to have them accept it. So that means that you have made a decision as to which way you're going to go, because once it goes to the state board, is it fact?
No, so it'll go up a couple of times just to sort of be edited and to be, and legal minds to look at it, in addition to Chris Leopold, who is looking at it for us. It will have gone through the board cycle, so we'll know what our boards and our communities think for the most part. And then, so then there'll be a couple of weeks of us discussing things back and forth with the Secretary of Education, bantering things back and forth. And then we would, I imagine, vote on it or not, make the decision of whether we did want to send it up, and then that would happen, and then we would go up.
Is there an opportunity, and maybe you already asked that, and I missed this answer, is there an opportunity after that point when this task force, this group has made their decision to put it up for a community vote, to then have a community discussion based upon what's going forward?
Right, so a lot of towns
Yes,
do that.
In which case, one of the things, and I'm thinking back to Christina, I keep thinking back to the idea of what we should present and how we should present it. And as someone who feels the state's imperative and feels the voters' imperative to address that, I would hope that at that point we would be able to put together a document that talked about the pluses and the challenges, the minuses of that document, so that when the community votes, that we will have some collective wisdom on the things that we think that are really strong about this, but we will also have collective wisdom about the limits of this document. And that doesn't mean that we are telling our voters to vote this way, but we are telling them this is the way in which the state dictated this process, and these are the things that we think are strong, but these are the things that we think are weak, and that if we have an opportunity to vote to come back to it, of course we would come back to the things that we
I
don't.
guess I didn't get a final answer to my question. After it goes up, I'm assuming that it's going up because you're deciding you're gonna go this one route. So it comes back after all this is done. Can you now say, nope, we're not going accelerated, we're gonna go another way?
I don't know, that might be a legal decision once it's passed by the state board.
Well, I think that's important for me to understand, you know, for you
Yeah,
to
and
understand.
right, we can look into it. I would just clarify that I don't think sending it up does not mean that we all think that this is the best option. Sending it up means that this is an option we think is worthy of consideration due to a variety of factors. We think this is worthy of consideration by the taxpayers. So I just want to clarify that. But it's 6:15, Jill has she's going to say something, and then I want to wrap this up, and so 6:15, 7:15.
You got another hour to go.
I was just thinking of what Richard said and Christina said, and that I'm still hopeful that we could look harder at some of the other
We're about
options.
to talk about that, yeah.
And I'm actually almost thinking that maybe we put aside the accelerated for this one meeting or something and spend one whole, and see how far we get.
Okay, so that's a good suggestion, and that was floating actually in my mind too. Can we say, though, that this schedule with we've been making changes to this schedule that I imagine Amy will make? Does that work, that we push it?
Sure.
Yeah? Okay. Yeah? Sounds good. Matt?
Here.
That was very positive.
We need to get him a striped shirt.
We can put numbers on it too. So it is 7:17, we have about 45 minutes. I think, does it make sense to take Jill's suggestion and next time really look at some other options? Just take, okay? I would suggest that might have to be a little bit of a longer meeting.
Well, we might be able to figure out which options. I mean, there's tons.
Right. So
we want to have that subcommittee meet again?
I would suggest that the subcommittee meet. I would like to hear before that, does that work that the subcommittee meets? It does mean that some research has to be done. So for example, if we were to be a Union Elementary, it's not as easy as it sounds. Because there are consequences for BUHS. We would have to, it sounds like that union would potentially have to be dissolved, that school union would have to be dissolved. It's complicated, but Chris says it is possible, but there are all these other philosophical choices that arise, right, when that happens, and financial considerations. So I would actually suggest that we ask Amy to look into that option with Chris. Does that work? And that Amy, let's see, what does that mean though? That means,
Can you say exactly what it is?
well, I'm just thinking of how to do this. So I do think this subcommittee needs to meet. That is one example of a very complicated scenario, which seems simple from the outset, but is complicated due to school choice, the middle schools, and the high school. Yeah.
I wonder if having the subcommittee look at this from the perspective of one of the questions I would ask, if I wasn't at that meeting, is what does that solve? I mean, what does that model solve?
I agree.
And so
right.
if we come at it with, the subcommittee has been part of this discussion, we know the kind of sticking points that have gone between groups. So what do these other options solve that we are wrestling with right now? And then come up with a handful of not even a handful, like 3, that would solve some of the bigger problems that we're addressing, and then keep it small so that we can be a little more in depth.
And maybe we can say what our problems are.
I think people would have to come up with them.
Well, speaking to Richard's suggestion, I think that's great. I think if we could come up with some type of matrix, just a really simple thing with the different options across, and then the specific concerns saying, yes, it's addressed, no, it's not.
Yeah.
That would,
Yeah.
very clearly indicate, what might hit the mark and what is not going to hit the mark.
And that would then help us later on down the road, that if we end up coming forward with one proposal, that going into a document that said, what are the limits to this particular proposal, and we would have investigated those along the way. And I like that.
Yeah. So it seems to me actually that the subcommittee might not meet because that might be unnecessary.
Right.
That we take a few minutes to I'm going to suggest that Amy puts together this document and then sits down. It's actually a lot of work. Right? So, and then would have to break it down. And Chris and Donna both actually said that if we want to look at some of these options seriously, we would need to go up to Mark Healy and really talk to them about it. Whether I am not convinced that we want to do that if we decide we're going to really keep focused on the accelerated merger, but we're not there yet, right?
Right.
So do we want to suggest other scenarios for Amy to look into for us? Or do we, and at the same time, share concerns?
I think we should share concerns.
Okay.
That would be sort of obvious.
Okay. So there are the obvious ones, school choice and equity, voting equity.
Voting equity, yeah. Town meeting.
I think along with that, you could turn your local board makeup, because this provides a different option that way too, potentially.
Local board makeup.
Say a little more
Is
about that.
is it different than the voting equity? Or-
Well, just that, depending on the options, not to get too detailed, but if you get into like reds and side-by-sides and stuff, you might have like 2 towns that have a combined board instead of 5 towns with a combined board. So it just creates some different options that way. Which, I mean, my understanding, anything short of making your case to the State Board of Education, your board makeup is going to change unless you do that. But this would provide alternatives within there. So for instance, we talked at one point, these might not be viable options, but like if Vernon and Guilford were side by side and Dummerston and Putney were side by side, then you would have a board that was like a Dummerston Putney board and a Vernon Guilford board. So I mean, it does give different options.
And it addresses some of the concerns that we just.
Yeah, I mean, you're still not having the complete thing in your town, but now it would be potentially 2 or 3 towns, depending on how you decide to go, versus 5 towns. So it is a different makeup.
School closing.
Yeah, school closing is an issue, but we definitely on the list of options we're looking at should be the justifying our current structure and saying exactly the way we are.
School, financial, sustainability, and programming equity in that.
that's where language would go, things like that, right under that.
But that's one of the problems, yes,
Yeah.
if we
Yeah.
don't merge and look at the different types of language.
But language, but also, you know, we have full-time art,
Right.
music,
Right.
PE. Dummerston has the same. You
Well,
have
it-
full-time art.
No, we have full-time art.
Right. So we have a lot of full-time specials.
So I wonder the way,
I mean-
program, I'm sorry.
Kim, go ahead.
If, one thing to look at too, if all the small schools go, all the small towns go off in Brattleboro and Bands High School, superintendents,
Yep.
administrations.
You're on the board, on the block, like this slate.
No, that's what I mean by the complications of the other option.
We know Ron's gonna retire here in a couple of years, so we'll just.
That was sooner than, move and see.
We might be moving that up.
That might be the selling
Okay.
There's two parts to it, would be, one part might be equity of program equity, and the
Yep.
other is school distinctiveness.
Yes.
The other idea that we have distinctive.
Did you have something about town meeting in there?
Yes.
I think the effect on special ed too, especially our direct bills. I know Richard and I, with Frank at Finance, have talked about this, and this is a much larger issue, and Amy there too, yeah, than a lot of people realize. The effect that has on your budget.
What is that?
That is one of the huge advantages to being a bigger district.
Right. The exposure to an individual town on this is huge.
Yeah, remember, I don't know if you remember at the SU meeting, where we talked about how the finance committee considered, we use the formula now where it's 60-40, you know, there's a formula that, to determine the shared, special ed costs that we, you know, share under the SU umbrella, and then for the out-of-district placements, that is direct billed to particular districts. And what we considered briefly as a finance committee was what it would be like if we also shared those direct bills. And it had, you know, significant implications for certain towns, and, you know, I think we agreed that it was something to work towards.
But over time,
Yeah.
it actually allows you to level those
Yes.
expenses in a way that the volatility right now.
Right, so if you have $100,000, you know, student move in, you know, a student that moves into town and it has an IEP that requires them to be placed in a $100,000 tuition program, you know, that, you know, a place like Dummerston, it blows our budget terribly, so.
Okay. Anything else for Amy?
I'll read back the concerns, school, yes, school closures, voting equity and voting board composition, town meeting preservation, school closings, sustainability, program equity, administration, distinctive schools cultures, and then special education cost implications. Did I get everything?
7th and 8th grade specifically, people seem to talk about.
Middle school, okay.
Would transportation be a consideration in that?
Yep.
Yeah.
And my term that not all of you like, was the veto power. I don't know if that's kind of already included.
No, that's in
the
this.
governance.
Under school choice, does it, I think we've made, do we mean both things, both within the new district, but also without, right? I mean, we're always talking about the movement between schools that are already within the
Yes,
district.
within and.
And
okay.
without, yeah.
Within and outside, okay.
Contract negotiation.
Amy, do you want to have someone do this with you?
I'm hoping Christina will do it.
All right,
Because
love
she's
to. That would be
sitting
great.
on- sitting on
Thank
the-
you.
the working group, and she'll have the.
Only if Matt comes.
We might even travel down to Vernon for you.
Just kidding.
So at our next meeting, it sounds like we're going to stay focused on this, right? So Jody, a quick comment from you. Hold on, and then I'd like to, Frank has some stuff to share with us, and I'd really like to have him share that with us before 8 o'clock.
I was just thinking you should also add to this group, this thing that you were talking about, additional costs. Additional cost in the supervisory union administration, additional cost for the new teachers that you're talking about, and the extracurricular stuff. You need to look at those.
I think she's got it. Great, thank you.
Big savings?
Yep.
Big savings?
Okay, yep. Great, thank you, Frank, for waiting. And
Okay, so for the financial information, I had a single sheet to pass out, and Ron and I had discussed the significance, of course, as we all know, staffing has on any kind of financial implications, so I think we're going to talk about that as well. Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna pass out 3 years of average class sizes from each school. Talk about this in relationship to financials.
Okay, so I think what we're heading toward as the conversation continues to develop, I know the focus has been on educational programs and on the equity that either exists or doesn't. And what this information shows is some of the financial statistics. We've looked at summary levels of this data before. Here's a little more detail to the data. So I'm looking at the financial, the single page, and what we see again is the fiscal year 16 budgets, but it's identified by function, which is instruction, student support is nursing and guidance, instructional staff support is professional development and library, media services, and I think you recognize the rest of those categories there that we all work with in our budgets. So the top set of data is current resources in terms of dollars. The middle is the proportion. It's the same information, only it's the proportion being utilized by those functional areas. And then on the far right, you see the comparison to the state statistics. And something I know Ron has emphasized in many board meetings is you can see the proportion of our system's spending on direct instruction relative to the state, pretty favorable. And as we go down through those categories, obviously the most of the spending is in those top two areas, direct instruction and then student support. So the other data that we see here is the school size based on equalized student, and then the spending numbers. We've seen this before, but here's where we start to see the inequity on the financial side of our system as it is now. And the spreadsheets that we've talked about in terms of program expansion, I think we had eight examples of various programs, whether it be summer programs, summer school, teacher leader programs, the way in which we manage our academic support for our systems. You know, the variation that we do from school to school is part of the variation that we see in the spending numbers. So one other thing I wanted to use as a resource, and I think the committee will find it very beneficial, just in the last few days, the study that has been somewhat long awaited by the legislature has now been released. This study is and I would assume you've seen a few of the headlines in the paper. It's called the Evidence-Based Method of Identifying Adequate Spending Levels for Vermont Schools. It's conducted by the Auden and Picus Associates. They're a very highly regarded research group that has done many assessments of adequacy. And what's very cool, I've only had a chance to read the executive summary, and I just glanced at the case studies. So they've spent, I think, nearly a year researching Vermont educational systems. This is all part of the state's request that's in conjunction with Act 46 that says let's look at the cost of an adequate education. And by the way, let's define what is an adequate education based on the state board expectations for learning, and of course the state constitution for public education. What's very cool is out of a statewide study, there are several case studies that exemplify systems that the model says provide an adequate education at a resource level that they feel the state can afford. And the Academy School was selected as one of the case studies, so I hope we can distribute this. I'm sure it's a public document.
Especially Academy and Oak Grove.
Yeah, Academy was selected, and the case study goes into a lot of detail, along with Oak Grove. And I'm spending a little time on this because this is what will inform the financial model as we go forward. And you know, many of you, Beth, you have asked some very good questions about, well, what would a proposed unified system look like? This is the kind of study that informs that question. What they do is they go through the characteristics of several successful schools, but it's all based on the research that indicates successful schools that have met proficiency expectations and the other types of outcomes that we look for students. And it's a report that articulates the cost and the staffing, the structure, the strategy that it takes to accomplish that. So I think it's very much what you've been asking for. This costs $300,000 to produce, and it's a very thorough and complete analysis. And when we get into it, it's things that we've talked about here. It's about the common curriculum. It's about the job coach and the support that we provide for the learning. It's the collaboration and the way we structure schedules so that teachers can meet, and that we focus on the data and take action. It's the way we plan, and we coordinate services in a way that are really effective. And it's very impressive to read and review, and it's so nice to see that we do have these examples of success right here in our system. So I think we can get this to the committee.
Yeah.
I think it will be a very good resource as we try to go from a research document to a practical budget document. So with that as a background, and knowing we've put a lot of work into some of the equity issues around program development, next step, it seems, for us would be to tie our staffing resources to a proposed budget that addresses the equity issue, and then also gets to one of the fundamental issues of why Act 46 is underway, which is that the state is basically saying we can't afford to spend the level of funding that we have and tolerate the inequity that we have in educational outcomes and educational opportunity across the state. With that, maybe we can talk about staffing and implications that we see for developing a unified budget. You want to start?
Yeah, so this document is, you can see 3 years of actual K through 6 class sizes So on one side, you have Brattleboro Town Schools, Academy, 3 strands, Green Street with 2 strands, Oak Grove with 1 strand. And then on the other side, you have Dummerston, Putney, Guilford, and Vernon. And so if you just look at the Vernon graph where it has 2 lines, what that means in, like in 2nd grade and 3rd grade, there are 2 teachers for that group of students, like the 33 students in 2nd grade, so you've got 2 sections.
We got 2 fourths too, right?
I'm sorry?
We got 2 fourths too, I don't know how that happened.
Wait, is
We
this,
got 13 and a 12, and she's fourth by grade, there's 2 classrooms.
is this last year?
No, 15, 16.
This is the current. You've got 2 4th grade?
Yeah, 2 fourth grades.
Mhm.
Ty and Marisa. It should actually be 13 and 12. Other than that, it's one time, sorry.
You got 2 2nd grades, 3rd grades as well?
This year, yeah. Yeah.
So 2nd, 3rd, and 4th?
Yeah. Yeah.
They're 2/3.
Yeah, you got Marcia and Lisa.
Marcia, I thought was working in
I'll-
Ty and
like,
Marisa. And then Kim and, Joni.
So that makes it even worse. So what I did was I looked at, when we were looking at the expanded opportunities and examples of potential savings, one of the areas that we looked at, like with special ed, changing the caseload from 1 teacher to 7.5 students to 1 teacher and to 12 students, changes the ratio, saves the money. And just looking at increasing class sizes from 12 to 14 students to 16 to 18, and just use that as a guide. I counted 24 class sections, actually it would be 25 now, with classes between 9 and 13 students. So of the whole district, there's, and I did it over the 3-year period, there's 24, 25 class sections with 9 to 13 students in that. So, if you look at trying to change that to a 16 to 18 student average, you're going to be much more cost effective. Now, in a shared unified district, a couple of ways you could do it would be some shared staffing between school districts. I know in some schools there's some academics support staff that will help with a large class size. So like in Dummerston, 2nd grade with 26, there's additional support in that classroom as opposed to breaking it out into 2 class sections. Then another option could be with parental choice, thinking about opening up options where a number of students would be, probably as we're looking at kindergarten numbers, thinking about students and families choosing to go to different schools that have more accommodating numbers than they have in the current scenario. So there's a bunch of ways that you can look at this in terms of creating some flexible staffing to get those class sizes up. But that's a big issue with the PICA study in terms of the student-to-teacher ratio, which is very costly in Vermont. And I feel like we're a pretty efficient district, but this says that we've got work to do. Yeah.
Maybe one other thing, if I could just point out of what Ron is illustrating is, in Brattleboro Town, when you look at the data there over time, particularly at the K1 level, you see an awful lot of consistency in classroom assignments. So each square is a teacher, a classroom, and those number of kids, right? So you see a lot of consistency there. And then when you flip the page and you look at the independent school districts, Dummerston, Putney, Guilford, and Vernon, you see a lot of inconsistency there. And the point is, no surprise to you folks, but the point is that the Brattleboro town system, because they have multiple schools, at the inception of enrolling kids into programs, if Oak Grove is full at 19, then there's a rotation to the next school, or vice versa. If Green Street is full, then it's Oak Grove. But there's a managed way of enrolling students that allows for a very good utilization of resources. And so Ron just illustrated 25 instances in this data set where we aren't able to do that, particularly when we're independent and we're not a unified system. So it's it's a significant impact on cost, and yet when you do manage enrollment, we can see that it can also be associated with exemplary educational outcomes. I'm not saying there's a correlation there. I'm just saying that the fact is that out of the entire state, they picked 2 of our schools, and they are schools that have the ability to utilize staff, facility, administration, a job coach, a central office support, fill up the school bus, essentially run a efficient and a cost-effective system. So you can see the data illustrates there's a little bit of a difference in those 2 structures.
Frank and Ron, I know one of the times in our Brattleboro meetings, we asked you a couple of years ago what your ideal numbers according to research. Do you remember for class size? You want to share that? Because I remember just kindergarten was like 17 or 18, and then it got larger, but I don't remember exactly how it was.
Yeah, so these are the, this is from the model class size from the policy that the state instituted a few years ago. So just want to make sure that I get your question. They're saying the maximum should be 20 in kindergarten. This document doesn't really have the range, but it seems to me that it was like 16 to 18. That's where I got that number from, that I put on the fact sheets that we used last time. Obviously, grades 5, 6, 7th, and 8th, it's higher. Maximum should be no more than 25, as they state. And I don't have the high school numbers here, but I know it's 18 to 25.
In this study here that I cited, it says that essentially those are typical numbers in most states. Their recommendation for Vermont was 17 because of our rural nature, but it's very much consistent with what
17 at what age group?
all elementary level.
So doesn't this data show that we're at the ideal already?
No, we're
Yeah.
below.
We're below?
Yeah.
And so, but if everybody's below, how are you going to increase class size? Because then you'd be taking students from one small class to increase the size of another and making the original source class even smaller. How could you possibly improve ratios without closing a school?
You wouldn't make it smaller, you'd increase the class size.
And where would those students come from?
As I said, it's either shared staffing where you have staff moving from school to school, like we do with specials, like we do with special ed teachers. There might be a need for a position and a half, 1.5 special ed teachers as opposed to 2. And then that one teacher is taking a half-time position in one school and half in another school. With the appropriate support services, you might be able to share staff between 2 geographic regions like Dummerston and Putney or Guilford and Vernon. We've done that with academic support teachers pretty easily with Brattleboro Town, where one serves at Green Street for half the day and Academy the other half of the day.
But isn't it true, Ron, that doesn't really increase class size?
Yeah, it would, because you're getting rid of these class sizes that are between 9 and 13. You're increasing them to 16 to 18.
Meaning the students would get spread around?
No.
Not necessarily.
It's the student-to-teacher ratio.
Yeah, I mean, through attrition, you'd be losing staff members.
I guess the question would be, you have in, just say in Dummerston, there's this kindergarten teacher
Yeah.
with 9 this
Yeah.
year. So it's 1 teacher and 9 staff. So I guess the thread that I'm having trouble following is, there's a kindergarten teacher in a room with 9 kids. We're gonna have 3/4 of a kindergarten. Do you see what I'm saying? Or
Yeah,
it's just a bad
yeah,
example.
yeah,
It
it's
would-
not,
Special ed would be a better example
Yeah.
of, so these ratios are the classroom teacher ratios, when you rightly point out special ed, where people could be shared as support staff.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the whole idea behind centralization. I think the PICA study says that the special ed costs are the lion's share. I think that's a direct quote. Special ed costs are the lion's share of where we're spending too much money. So I think that is a better example than somebody imagining, wait a minute, the kindergarten teacher's gonna be gone for half the day? What's?
yeah, no, I wouldn't see that, but on my notes, I have like the number 3 at Putney. If geographically, there are Putney families that live as close to Dummerston as to the Putney Central School, would those 3 students start at Dummerston?
Right.
You know, to increase that class size.
Right.
If you look at Guilford and Vernon, there might be 3 Vernon residents that are pretty close to the Guilford line and start at Guilford. So, you know, in a unified system, it's like what Frank was saying with Brattleboro Town. You know, it doesn't really necessarily mean much if you're starting at Oak Grove or Green Street or Academy. We have to balance out those numbers, and we try to do it through neighborhoods, but in some cases, when Oak Grove gets full, we have no other option but Green Street or Academy. And it may be advantageous to some families that, given the choice, that they'd like to do that. I'm not saying we will force that, but that's just, you know, one way you could do that. You know, in the Vernon model, the Vernon case, you'd definitely be eliminating the need for 3 additional teachers.
Can you hold on?
These are important questions.
Yes, but we have a board, we have a group. Questions for Ron, or?
If nobody has questions.
I'm asking a question. How would pre-K work into this? Are there numbers that we could address?
Oh, we have numbers for pre-K, I don't have
Yeah.
them here
Can you
today.
just-
Yeah, we could look at that.
I'd be very interested.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and they mentioned this in the report that you know, Vermont has gone down a path that I haven't read this report in its entirety yet, but they indicate that the private provider format is very different than what they see in most states. And I think that's a good question as to, you know, what would it look like at this point. Act 62, 5 years ago, you know, created the option for a private provider model. And so that's been pretty well established in most schools. Putney's kind of the exception, as you know. So that's a kind of a complicated scenario, because you have to, you either have a diluted number of students to choose from, because some are going to a private system and others might go to the public. And if you want to move toward a public system, then you have to undo the private, and that's not an easy thing to do.
If we unify in any way, that's something I would be interested in exploring. Yes?
Sorry to interrupt you before, but this is a sobering document, because what the data that I'm seeing on this average class size piece of paper here is that all of the class sizes are small across the board, pretty much. Dummerston, Putney, Vernon, Guilford. And I haven't heard any solutions. Nobody has explained how unification is going to increase class size, because shifting a few students here or there is just going to decrease an already small classroom and shift 1 or 2 students to another. And you're not going to be increasing class sizes with unification unless, and this is the unspoken, there's a school closure somewhere. And I haven't heard any explanation for how you're gonna increase class size.
Okay. So your first statement was wrong. When you look at this data, it shows that most of our classes are at a range between 16 to 18. It's not that, well, but then you look at the ones that aren't.
That's what I'm saying.
Most of them are of the appropriate class sizes. But when you look at the ones that aren't, you've got to say, so how can we maintain class sizes of 9 to 13 kids in an efficient way? So this has nothing to do with school closure. There's nothing on here that causes me to say, oh, this shows that we got to close schools. Absolutely not.
Just want to be more efficient within.
Absolutely.
Vernon
Sharing
has
resources.
3 teachers, I mean,
Yeah.
6 teachers teaching 3 classes. Let's pool our resources and make it work.
And thinking about the use of academic support teachers, that we know there's a blip one year and we can accommodate that large class size with that type of academic support with the teacher, where you have a special educator. You know, in large class sizes, we think about the classroom teacher, the special educator, the academic support teacher, and possibly a parent. You break into small groups for a lot of instruction. You could do that in a number of examples here without additional staffing. And this to me shows me that the status quo has caused us to really increase staff when we shouldn't be. That's what it says to me.
Matt?
I
and
have
then
2
Richard.
points here. So, one I just want to point out, and not poke fun at this, but Vernon has 10 classrooms operating, grades kindergarten through 6th grade, which is 7 classrooms, and then 3 double classrooms. And we have 159 students right now, so we have a 15.9 average, which is not crazy below the rest. What we have is very big extremes from 12 or 13 to 21, 22. And what I hear Ron saying potentially, and I'm just looking at this with our neighbor town, so Vernon has 21 kindergarten and Guilford has 14, maybe there's a chance that some parents might say, hey, I live on Tyler Hill Road in Vernon and I actually wouldn't mind having my student in a smaller classroom, and they would have this option. They wouldn't be forced into it, but they'd have that option. So that's what I hear as a positive. As a negative, I guess I hear if you're a parent of a classroom that is 12 or 13, the thought that that might be mandatorily increased is probably not a real pleasant thought either. So I mean, on both sides. But I think if you have options with it, that's helpful.
And I think the underlying thing is the class size, as you already indicated, doesn't tell all the answers. It's the staff, it's the ratio. And it's the ratio that will make the change. Not necessarily the numbers moving around of students, but the ratio of staff.
And, you know, Matt's example, if you take it a step further, we have families that in some cases tuition their kids to the Brattleboro schools. And if they work in the district, then there's a half tuition rate that they can use. So those are just some people that get that benefit. But again, if you have a unified system and because of working conditions, somebody's gonna be in Brattleboro from Vernon or Guilford or the other towns, you know, why not have that as an option?
And that's actually an active conversation at our board, because we have lost teachers because their children were going to be in another school district, so they went to work in the other school district. So it's 7:56. Can we close our meeting? We next meet at the Guilford School on February 24th. That is.
I need clarity on March 2nd.
I believe we're meeting as a study committee on March 2nd. Yep. Yeah. Is there a motion? Yes. Guys, let's stay quiet for a sec. Any other agenda? I know we're going to stay pretty focused, if not exclusively focused, on the other options.
Can we add a school choice based on numbers, that type of discussion that we just talked about into your matrix? It's not the same as school choice before.
Yeah. So, can I suggest that if anyone in the next day or two has something that they want these two ladies to look at, email them, correct? Anything else that we want in? Or is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Second? All those in favor, was there a second?
Yes.
All those in favor? Aye. Thank you, everyone.